Are we in for another summer of discontent? Sir Andy Cooke, His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Constabulary, has said there is every possibility of rioting this summer.
We'll be joined by Martin Evans, our crime editor, who's going to be telling us about a plan for this weekend for mass demonstrations in support of Palestine action that could mean thousands of people breaking the law.
What do the police do? Do they try and arrest everybody? That in itself is difficult, creates a headache. In London, there are a finite number of cells available to hold people. And then if eventually these people are charged with these offences, we already know that the criminal justice system is at absolute breaking point.
Well, Cleo, over the weekend we saw quite a striking scene, didn't we, from Canary Wharf in London. There was a protest that began with mothers and children dressed in pink. They were dancing a conga, sort of peacefully, in opposition to a migrant housing hotel. And then masked men turned up and hijacked the event. We saw clashes with the police. Only a few weeks ago, of course, there was a largely peaceful demonstration outside the Bell Hotel in Epping, which began after an asylum seeker was charged with allegedly attempting to kiss a 14-year-old girl.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sir Andy Cooke, who's His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Constabulary, he's issued a stark warning saying there's every possibility of riots similar to last summer's Southport unrest erupting again. And in fact, I was thinking about this earlier, Gordon, because I was rereading some reporting that a friend of mine, James Johnson, who's a pollster, did for Channel 4, where he was talking about, he mainly works in America now, and he came back to a few places in the UK to do some focus groups late last year, early this year. And he said that without any prompting, the idea of civil unrest, civil war, violence in quite small communities, places like Grimsby, were very clear to people. And there are these flashpoints already emerging around particularly migrant hotels in towns and cities. We've had Norwich, Newcastle, Epping, Leeds, and that's combining with coverage of ever higher small boat numbers. So lots of people are asking, how much longer can the public patience hold?
Yeah, and then we've had Robert Jenrick. He's been on the media rounds today saying that there's increasing evidence of a link between migration and sexual assaults. Let's just hear what he had to say.
I respect those people who are peacefully protesting outside hotels this weekend. I understand why they feel so concerned. They're seeing their communities damaged, and I'm afraid there is increasing evidence of a serious link between illegal migration, migration generally, and crime, particularly sexual crime against women and girls. In London, 40% last year of all of the sexual crimes were committed by foreign nationals, despite the fact that they only make up 25% of the population. And some of the data that we're seeing, we don't have good data at the moment, but some of the data we're seeing is very striking. Afghans and Eritrean nationals are 20 times more likely to be convicted of a sexual crime than a British national. These are very shocking statistics, and I understand why mums and grandmothers would be out on the streets in places like Epping and Canary Wharf voicing their legitimate concerns.
But meanwhile, Labour's Angela Eagle, who's the Border Security and Asylum Minister, refuted those claims.
Are you saying you think the Conservatives, and in particular Robert Jenrick, are, or are you open to a debate that says this is uncomfortable for some, talking about the nationality of people who carry out crimes, and particularly sexual crimes, but it is one that the government wants to have, providing the data is right?
I don't mind having debates about anything, but I think we haven't got good data on this, and I think that we've got to look at the principle, and that is that we've got to deal with all sexual criminality, whoever perpetrates it, in that way, in an almost colour-blind way. If a girl has been abused by somebody or has been subjected to a vile sexual crime, it doesn't really matter what the colour of the skin of the perpetrator is. We've got to bring that person to justice and look after that victim.
OK, well, we're joined, as we said earlier, by Martin Evans, our crime editor. Welcome again to the Daily Tea, Martin.
Thank you.
Stalwart of this podcast. So you wrote a piece today, didn't you, about a plan for pro-Palestinian demonstrations this weekend, and there are some problems brewing over that. Just tell us what that story is.
Yeah, so what we discovered is that there is a plan for Saturday, August the 9th, for pro-Palestinian supporters to hold a mass demonstration. And so what this will be a test for Yvette Cooper's recent banning of Palestine Action. It was quite a controversial decision by the government. This is a group of people who in recent months have essentially been committing vandalism. They've been spray painting banks. Their activities have increased in gravity in recent months. And last month we saw an alleged attack by some Palestine Action activists on the RAF Bryce Norton site in Oxfordshire, where they allegedly damaged 2 aircraft. And following that incident, Yvette Cooper announced that she was prescribing Palestine Action, and that essentially means she was declaring them a terrorist organisation. Now, following that decision, there were a number of demonstrations, particularly in London, where supporters of Palestine Action took to the streets and essentially declared that they supported Palestine Action. Now, that in itself is a crime under the Terrorism Act.
Yeah.
To declare support for a terrorist organisation is a criminal offence. In fact, the infamous Anjem Chowdhury, when he was first jailed, that was the offence for which he was sent to prison. He got 5 years for that.
He's one of these so-called hate preachers,
Indeed.
isn't he, who's been around a very long time.
Yeah. And so it's a serious offence to declare support for a terrorist organisation. But what we saw after the prescription was a number of people who you wouldn't imagine could be considered to be terrorists. One was an 83-year-old retired Church of England priest, and what supporters did was they essentially held up banners in the street. It was a very peaceful protest. They held up banners which read, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action." And for that they were arrested. Now, nobody has yet been charged because there is a legal challenge going through the courts at the moment over the decision to ban Palestine Action. And I think prosecutors will probably wait to see what happens with that challenge before they decide whether to charge anyone. But in the background, supporters of Palestine Action and those sympathetic to them have decided that they're going to actually challenge this head on by getting thousands of people to take to the streets and do exactly the same thing. Hold up banners saying, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action." And that creates a real headache for the authorities, because you've potentially got thousands of people breaking the law en masse. What do the police do? Do they try and arrest everybody? That in itself is difficult, creates a headache. In London, there are a finite number of cells available to hold people. And then if eventually these people are charged with these offences, we already know that the criminal justice system is at absolute breaking point, completely overwhelmed, backlogs in the courts. Cases are being listed for 2027, 2028, 2029 even. So if you potentially get thousands of people who are charged with terror offences, what does that do to the criminal justice system? Can you process them? So this is really going to be a challenge for both the police and the government as to how they work this out.
Okay, and what do we think this is going to look like? What are we going to see on Saturday? Is this going to be one demonstration happening in, London, or is it going to be all around the country, or what can we expect to see?
Well, from what I've seen so far, the plans suggest that there will be a series of demonstrations around the country, but I think the main one is likely to be in Westminster. Obviously, from their point of view, it'll be more effective if you can concentrate it in one area, because that puts more pressure on one particular police force. if you to do this across the country in a series of small demonstrations, it probably wouldn't create quite as much of a headache for the police. So I think it's likely that there will be demonstrations in towns and cities across the country, but it seems as if the main one will take place in Westminster.
Okay. Cleo, you are a member of the House of Lords and you used to work in Downing Street.
Oh, I'm not a member of the House of Lords.
Oh, sorry.
I've suddenly got an upgrade.
So, Cleo, you used to work in Downing Street.
Yes.
What sort of conversations will be going on among politicians and in Downing Street to try and brief the police to try and decide how they're going to handle this if, as Martin says, literally thousands of people turn up and effectively all break the law at once?
So the last summer that I was in Downing Street was 2020, so it was COVID. And if you remember, in the wake of George Floyd's death in America, there were Black Lives Matter protests in the UK. And actually, to Martin's point, they happened in groups of sort of 250 across the country. There weren't people in their thousands, but it was a big problem because we needed COVID rules complied with. And in some ways, it was better for the police because they had permission to be incredibly draconian, to slap fines on people. And actually, however you feel about COVID and social distancing and rules at the time, a £1,000 fine per person was, if people weren't socially distancing, was quite compelling. And obviously that is not a piece of the puzzle that Yvette Cooper has when dealing with a potential terrorist organisation. And then you will have a flashpoint. You generally respond to things rather than prepare for them, unfortunately. Lots of the political people are thinking about September, October and party conference and the budget. And they're not necessarily picking up what's happening on a really local level in places like Epping and Norwich and so on. So they're relying on kind of what they're hearing from the Home Office and from the police and making some kind of political decisions, both within the party and the strategists and speaking to parliamentarians and trying to get a sense of what they think and what's actually workable and practical. And everyone, in my experience, slightly hides behind each other here. So if you've noticed that Warwickshire Police today have said they have responded to this attack a couple of weeks ago by following national guidelines about not producing the ethnicity data.
So this is the incident where there is an
alleged rape of a 12-year-old girl
Yes.
by Afghan asylum seekers.
Yeah, and the leader of Warwickshire Council, George Finch of Reform, he's the 19-year-old, people will have seen him in the media. He's accused the police of covering up the alleged rape of this 12-year-old girl. He says that Warwickshire Police advised local councillors and officials not to reveal the details of the suspects for fear of, as they say, inflaming community tensions.
Whether you are the Prime Minister, whether you're an MP, whether you're from an opposition party or not, the kind of political team and strategist needs to decide, understanding where large swathes of the country are on this and where their supporters are and what actually helps and what inflames these tensions. And I think the point that has been made repeatedly today about Warwickshire Police not revealing the ethnicity of the two alleged perpetrators in this case is that a couple of weeks ago with the Liverpool car crash, police were very quick to reveal the man in that case was white.
Yeah,
and
that was the car that ploughed through a crowd.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so, again, we're getting back to this idea of two-tier policing. And where do politicians sit here? Is it better to try and point these things out in every instance and, to be honest, make some hay with it, if that's where they think voters are? Or do you have a responsibility to try and take a beat and talk about this in sort of moderated tones?
Yeah. Well, before we talk a bit more about that, just to go back to Martin on the what's happening this weekend, presumably, Martin, Yvette Cooper will have been speaking to police chiefs, will she, about what their response should be this weekend? And are the police saying anything about what they intend to do to police these events or this event, depending on how many there are?
Not officially at this stage, but I spoke to a retired Met officer who worked in public order policing for 30 years. He's an expert in how the police handle things like this. And he had some quite interesting points to make practically. So he said if an event takes place in London where there are thousands of people who need to be arrested, or hundreds of people who need to be arrested, there are ways of managing that, clearly. So in terms of a couple of years ago, there was a weekend where a lot of Just Stop Oil protesters took to the streets and closed roads. And there was a large number who were arrested and taken into custody. And that weekend, a contact rang me and said there isn't a single police cell left available in London.
Yeah.
Now, I put this to him yesterday, and he said, well, there is a contingency. What you would do is you would contact force areas outside the M25 and say, we need some cell space. So there are ways to handle it, and the police will certainly have in mind what they would need to do if there were not just a demonstration like this, but large-scale disturbances where they need to arrest and detain lots of people. So, yeah, I mean, the police will certainly have contingency measures. They will no doubt be speaking to the Home Secretary. I mean, this issue is particularly interesting because I'd imagine the vast majority of people who may take part in this plan will be doing so peacefully.
Yeah, and they're probably fairly ordinary members of the public,
Absolutely.
aren't they?
You may not even know about the terrorist link either. They won't realise they're
Well, I
part
think
of
that. So from what I understand is that this plan, quite a lot of thought has gone into it, and what the organisers are asking is for a minimum of 500 people to sign a pledge saying they will be willing to do this next Saturday. And the reason that they're looking for that sort of critical mass is they think that number is what the minimum that they need to create this headache for the authorities.
Are we getting into the realms then of arrestables? I think with Just Stop Oil, they had a thing, didn't they, where people would sort of say whether they were willing to be arrested, and therefore they would be sort of, they'd be the ones that would sit down in the street or whatever, and then there'll be other people who would be supporters, but who would be classed as non-arrestable. They were people who maybe had a respectable life, didn't particularly want to be, have a rap sheet. Are we getting into that territory?
Absolutely. I mean, the briefing document that I saw, which is people are being urged to read this document carefully before they sign this pledge. And the first thing it says is, that there is a risk to getting involved with this, and they make it very clear that, you need to be willing to be arrested. As I say, interestingly, because of this legal challenge, nobody has yet been charged. So there is a possibility that although you might be arrested, you may never be charged. Now, one of the issues with this is terrorism legislation.
Yeah.
You get charged with a terror offence, it has a major impact on your life. So people are being told that they really need to consider this carefully. The implications could, in terms of travel, in terms of employment.
Yeah. Could they end up on a no-fly list if they get
potentially? I mean, yeah.
So if you are an 83-year-old retiree from the Church of England, you arguably don't mind about that so much. So, I remember when we were in Number 10, chiefly the protests were Extinction Rebellion, actually, on Whitehall. Priti Patel was Home Secretary, and she was very aggressive about the practical disruption this caused. Obviously, these were not terrorists, but there was discomfort at the time of grandmothers and quite often with their grandchildren being sort of moved along as sort of gently, forcibly removed as possible. And there must be some debate in the Home Office at the moment, if you're Yvette Cooper, that you're actually quite unlikely, therefore, to have people in their 20s and 30s, perhaps young professionals and students, because they don't want to be charged with terrorism offences. But actually, the whole point of some of the Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil protests was that they were much older people who really felt they didn't mind actually, and that they could live with being, this is a different level altogether, but there must be some discomfort if you're the head of the Met.
Well, Sir Mark Rowley, following the arrest of the 83-year-old police, he did make a comment that the law doesn't have an age barrier.
Of course,
and it's meted out equally. But I think to go to your point, there is a mix on this issue. What's happening in Palestine is an incredibly emotive subject, and lots of people feel incredibly strongly about it and believe that they will be on the right side of history, so are willing to take the implications of what might happen to them.
But also the image of an 83-year-old being arrested, contrasting with men in balaclavas and masks, sort of hijacking what are peaceful protests elsewhere, does give this sense of compare and contrast, and it's quite clever PR, I would argue.
It's obviously going to be a massive test for policing, and it's going to be fascinating to see how they deal with it. Let's talk a bit more about the wider issue here of what's going on in the country. We mentioned in the intro there Sir Andy Cooke, the Chief Inspector of Constabulary, who wrote a report that came out over the weekend. He said that last year the riots, obviously, they were triggered by the Southport stabbings, but he was saying that they happened spontaneously. They weren't sort of planned. There wasn't a sort of central organisation. And so he says the same thing is true now because you have social media amplifying sometimes false narratives or sometimes things that maybe people wouldn't know about if they didn't have social media, because something happens in one part of the country, quite a small thing, and it suddenly everyone knows about it, and it can kick off. And the police struggle to keep up with the speed at which these things gather pace on social media. So that's one of the things that he was saying. And then we've got things like the what Robert Jenrick was talking about, this increasing evidence of a link between migration and sexual assaults. We've got, just today, the Leicestershire Police and Crime Commissioner, Rupert Matthews, he's defected to Reform, saying that some towns and cities in England and Wales have become, what he says, in his words, an apocalyptic wasteland of lawless Britain. Not a man who's sitting on the fence, Cleo. But so this is what we're looking at, isn't it? And I guess the question to you, Martin, is what are the police doing to try and avoid another summer of rioting? They've had that experience already from last year. How are they going to try and stop this happening again?
Well, interestingly, Andy Cooke, who wrote this piece in the Sunday Telegraph, that was to coincide with the sort of the 1-year anniversary of the disorder. But actually, over the last year, his organisation, His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, have been doing a lot of work, along with the National Police Chiefs Council, in looking at the police response to the disorder last summer. And they have published 2 reports over about the last 12 months, looking at where the police got things wrong, what they did right, and what areas they need to improve. And so the piece this weekend was really taking from their findings, and what they really concluded was that the police were quite slow to respond to last year's disorder, and also they were slow in spotting it coming. And so a lot of work has been going on across policing to make sure that they're more nimble in terms of spotting things coming down the line. Now, how that works is probably quite varied, but I'd imagine they will be looking at things like social media and monitoring that really closely, because of course that's where we can see things developing. And also then the response where you have small incidents of disorder, perhaps in places like Epping and as we saw at the weekend in London, the police will be keeping a very close eye on that to see that it's not spreading quickly, because of course what we did see last year was the awful incidents in Southport. The disorder that followed started locally in Southport. Within 24, 48 hours, it was burning elsewhere.
Yeah.
And of course that's how riots happen. If we think back to 2011 and the disorder then, that's exactly what happened. That started with disorder in Tottenham following the shooting of Mark Duggan by police. And within 72 hours, it was all over the country. And so the police will be looking at how they can spot where it's spreading and then move resources into ensuring that if it does happen, they have the numbers that are able on the ground to contain it.
How worried are they that this is going to happen? Are they doing things like cancelling leave, or how are they preparing?
I'm not aware that any orders of leave have been cancelled, but certainly resourcing is always in their mind. Chief constables would be looking at their shift patterns and making sure that in August, when lots of people, particularly with families, are on holiday, they'll be making sure that they do have enough officers, if needed, to respond to anything. I mean, the other thing, obviously, we have 43 police forces in this country. We police regionally and locally. But of course, if there is a national issue, we have a thing called mutual aid, where police forces can move resources around the country to help out other forces where they're not resourced. In fact, recently we saw disorder in Northern Ireland, and Police Scotland very, very quickly sent resources over there because they were fearing that things could get out of control really quickly.
The other thing I was wondering, Martin, is within Sir Andy Cooke's report, is there some reflection on the accusations of two-tier policing, particularly with regard to social media and tweets? So obviously we all know the case of Lucy Connolly. There's the case of Simon Pearson, the teacher who was sacked for tweeting in support of Lucy Connolly and pointing out that he felt this was an extreme example of two-tier policing. Is there a sense in the police that not only are they worried about violence, but almost like a second wave or ripple effect of public anger?
It would be fair to say that the police have absolutely rejected any accusations of two-tier policing. And of course, the Lucy Connolly case was really more about the sentencing, which is not a matter for the police.
Right.
The allegation is that the sentencing hasn't been handed out equally, and she got a far more stringent sentence than people who have tweeted things that are left-wing, for instance. So the police absolutely reject accusations of two-tier policing, but obviously that accusation is very damaging to the trust and confidence in policing, and so while they reject it, they're very alive to being able to respond to it. And the point you made earlier about the incident in Warwickshire and the alleged attack on a child there by asylum seekers, it's a real issue, this for police forces and police chiefs. You rightly said that following the incident at the Liverpool Premier League parade, Merseyside police were very quick to put out details of the ethnicity of the suspect. And of course it was Merseyside police that dealt with the Southport incident. And what we've learnt subsequently is that the chief constable there was very keen at the time of Axel Ruda-Cabana's arrest that more information about his background was put into the public domain. And there were various clashes with the Crown Prosecution Service about that, because another issue that perhaps isn't picked up on by commentators is, if we take the Warwickshire case, for instance, I mean, we're not sure of the details of that case, and we're not sure what the jury will and won't be told down the line. But of course, it could be seen as very prejudicial if somebody's asylum status was put into the public domain and the jury were not expected to learn about that.
Let's. I think that's a good point. And we should talk about cause and effect, shouldn't we? And I'm going to pretend that I'm completely neutral here, and I'm going to say that, Martin, you're the journalist in the room, and Cleo, for the purposes of this podcast, you're the politician in the room. Okay.
Oh, great.
There is obviously a lot of sort of responsibility in the hands of politicians and journalists in terms of the balance between telling people what's going on and the risk of inflaming tensions to the extent where we get things like rioting. Okay, so let's just take those two things separately. From a journalist point of view, Martin, do you get a lot of sort of are there conversations that you have with the police where they put pressure on you to say don't report this because it might inflame tensions, and to what extent do those conversations go on in the newsroom about whether or not we should report things in case they inflame tensions?
Well, I think it's important to say that the police are often in the driving seat in this relationship. So they will often have information that they don't disclose regarding an investigation. Now, I think in reality, if I was to discover some information about an investigation that I was confident was accurate, and I was confident would not
prejudice
a criminal trial, then I think we would almost certainly publish that information. Discussions may be had as to the impact socially of that. Could it potentially lead to disorder? But I think, from a journalist's point of view, our trade is to inform the public.
Yeah. Report what you know.
Yeah.
Cleo, it's much more nuanced, isn't it, from a political point of view? Journalists, by and large, can just say, well, here's the facts, we just give the public the facts, and then it's up to other people to decide.
It's that expression public interest, isn't it, which is now a bit more contentious on something like this, I suppose.
Yeah, to an extent. But so, as I say, those conversations in Downing Street, in Westminster, in Whitehall, will be a lot more tricky because there is not quite the same imperative to just tell people everything you can, and you have to, I'm saying if you were a politician, you have other things to take into account. So just give us an idea of what those conversations are like from the political side, and the extent to which perhaps at the moment Keir Starmer and the government are struggling to balance keeping the public informed with trying to keep public order.
Well, again, I think this time of year is really interesting because MPs are in their constituencies, by and large, unless they're on a lovely sunny beach somewhere. And I think this is one of the really interesting issues where traditionally, before social media, this was a local news story, so local news would cover it, local MPs would know all about it. And suddenly these issues blow up much quicker than you'd expect, much like the Southport riots, because everyone can see it happening on TikTok. Obviously, these things always come down to the appetite of the Prime Minister and where they sit on policing, crime, justice, and the interference of the state. And Keir Starmer, when he got into Downing Street, he stood on the steps and said, I'm going to tread lightly on voters' lives. Well, that's quite difficult on something like this, because you have, the freedom of expression, the opportunity to protest, but you also have to think about normal people's lives. And, the big problem for us with Black Lives Matter, and particularly with Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil a couple of years ago, was people had quite a valid point to make. And actually, Boris Johnson, who was the Prime Minister at the time, had a lot of sympathy with particularly the kind of eco-warriors, because he is one, essentially. Yeah. But he had a lot of experience in being Mayor of London with rioting and violence in particularly in 2011. And he felt that you have to jump on these things quite quickly.
But what would his opinion have been? Let's say he was Prime Minister now, and you had this sort of bubbling resentment and this sort of tension going on around immigration and matters about ethnicity. Would he be in favour of just telling the public everything, or would he be telling people, look, we need to keep information back because it might cause a riot?
If Dominic Cummings was Chief of Staff, if Priti Patel was Home Secretary, if Dominic Raab was Justice Secretary, which is what we had for this period, which is quite a powerful group of people behind him, there were certain details where if it was to prejudice a investigation, I think that just goes without saying. You don't tell, you don't reveal these things. But serious thought would have gone into what problems do you cause yourselves by making Palestine Action, for example, a terrorist organisation? Because mass protest is so difficult to police. And the big changes, we didn't have reform on our flank suggesting things like Nightingale prisons, and perhaps Labour will take a leaf out of Nigel Farage's book and make Nightingale cells this weekend in school sports halls or something.
Wow, that'd be a story, wouldn't it?
Who knows? Who knows? But ultimately, so much of it comes down to where do the public assist on this? How much do they want to know? And how many problems do you cause by revealing too much? And ultimately, I think if I were in Downing Street now, I would have Keir Starmer, assuming he was comfortable with this position, going to visit police all over the country and, speaking to them and showing an interest. But I haven't seen him anywhere in the last 10 days.
I think one of the other issues as well that is worth considering, that if you keep information back, you cannot keep it back forever.
Yes.
And when that information eventually comes out, you're accused of a cover-up, and that's often more damaging than just being transparent in the first place.
With Southport.
In almost any issue, you want to be as honest as you can, as quickly as you can, or things snowball. And so much of this is the impression the government gives and giving people confidence that they're on top of this. And I think that is part of the problem at the moment. They've allowed, whether it's fair or not, two-tier policing to take hold, and people being sentenced more strictly for tweets than for, actually, in many people's minds, worse crimes. And that's part of the problem. And compounded by that is this sense of immigration taking over. Small boats keep coming, welfare being cut for the people who need it most and being given to migrants to stay in hotels with four-poster beds. Like, these little details come out and it drives people bananas, and it just doesn't give people the sense that the government has got a handle on things. And it certainly doesn't help them think, I'm really confident that the nukes are safe, or that AI isn't going to take over and there are going to be some terrible decisions, if they can't stop a few dinghies.
Yeah. Here's a thought. You said that you would be advising Keir Starmer to talk to police forces. Would you advise Keir Starmer to turn up at one of these protests and speak to the crowd and just say to them, look, this is how we expect you to behave, and this is what we're going to be doing, and this is where the line is, and if you cross that line, you're going to be arrested? Or would that be a disaster?
I just don't think it's his style, and I think it's unhelpful for the police if you have politicians who need police protection turning up, armed police protection turning up to these sorts of things. I don't think it's something that he is particularly capable of doing. And the problem is that the protests are just a result of a deeper issue, which is a sense of discontent, of unfairness and general grievance. That's what he should concentrate on. And I suspect when the budget rolls around in the autumn, that isn't going to take into account how people are really feeling. So
No.
is it a summer of discontent? Who knows? It could well be an autumn.
Yeah.
And of course, in his previous life as a human rights lawyer, he may well have been turning up offering to represent some of these
Well, or he
people.
may have been.
Well-
Or he may have been taking part in the
But this,
process.
this is the great irony, isn't it? He was director of public prosecutions. You would think that this is ground he'd be incredibly confident on. And maybe I'm not paying attention, but the last time I saw him was up in Aberdeen with Donald Trump.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there we have it. Martin, thanks ever so much for being in the studio, as ever.